He thinks the reason why Fei Jie is so puzzling is, didn't his father always care about his illegitimate son? Why would he send a teacher here specially? If it's just to teach reading, how could he have such an old pervert to teach him? Seeing that the other party knew Uncle Wu Zhu, Fan Xian knew that it was not his turn to intervene in this matter, so he pretended to be stupid and sat down on the bed. After the adults explained everything clearly, Fan Xian used his little arms to take off the sheets from teacher Fei Jie, and then hid behind Wu Zhu and giggled, acting like a fool. It's a pity that a small hand was exposed today. The two powerful people in front of them knew that the mind of the 4-year-old child in front of them was not simple. The sky was already getting slightly brighter, and the sound of roosters crowing and servants boiling water could be heard faintly in the distance. Wu Zhu led Fei Jie out, but before leaving, Fan Xian heard a cold word from Wu Zhu. "When will I explain why you know who I am?" Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat, and he really didn't know how to explain it. For years ago, when he came to Danzhou with Uncle Wu Zhu, he was only a few months old. He thought about it again and again, but couldn't find a good excuse. It was only because he was frightened by that weird old man Fei Jie. Danzhou City began to wake up from sleep, but the inconspicuous small grocery store showed no sign of opening. In a dark room in the store, Wu Zhu looked at Fei Jie coldly. What does lame mean? Although Fei Jie can be regarded as a master of the generation in some respects, when he thought about the cold-blooded and vicious nature of the blind young man in front of him according to the rumors, he couldn't help but feel a little worried. He replied, "Young master will always grow up, and he will always grow up in the future. If you face the things in Kyoto, prepare early and you will have a better chance of winning in the future." Wu Zhu raised his head and looked at him. Although he knew that the other party was a blind man, Fei Jie always felt that there were two murderous lights staring at him from behind the black cloth. He smiled and said, "If the 5 adults have any objections, I can return to Kyoto immediately. I believe you will respect your opinion." Wu Zhu shook his head. "I think it's not that simple for the cripple to ask you to come." Not bad. Fei Jie thought to himself that only the guy in front of him dared to call the dean a cripple directly. He bent down and replied, "My lord has never found the box left by the lady. I am very worried that it will be found by those who are interested. So I would like to ask the 5 great people to give me some advice." "There's no need to look for it. The young lady destroyed the box before she passed away," Wu Zhu said expressionlessly. Fei Jie nodded, turned to leave, and suddenly frowned. "I always feel that the young master is a little strange. 5 adults? He is only 4 years old, and you let him practice such a domineering Jinqi technique. Aren't you afraid of something happening? The strange thing is still behind. I didn't teach him his true Qi skills." Wu Zhu looked at the poisonous person who was about to become the little master's teacher and said calmly, "Thank you for the hard work." Fei Jie touched the aching wound on his head. He felt that these words seemed to be a bad omen, so he said goodbye with a wry smile. After he left, the blind Wu Zhu entered a secret room of the grocery store and stared blankly at a dusty box in the corner. His eyes were still covered with the piece of black cloth, but it was obvious that he was thinking about something. During the day, a strange gentleman came to the count's residence. After submitting his name, he was personally received by the old lady. Somehow, he gained the old lady's trust and began to serve as the second husband of the young master of the Fan family. The maids had already spread the word about this, and they were all surprised that a guy with his head wrapped in gauze and looking like an old gangster could be qualified to be his lovely young master. In the study, Fan Xian was beating Mr. Fei's back obediently. He knocked off the pillow last night, and now he had to quickly please him. "Teacher, you can't blame the student," he said in a coquettish voice, feeling quite disgusted in his heart. "Take a knife. The student is young, so he is a little impulsive." Fei Jie thought to himself how he could pry open the door without a knife. He was just planning to secretly see what this legendary illegitimate child looked like. Who knew that such a kid would stay up in the middle of the night and play with insomnia? So this misunderstanding is inevitable, but the back of my head still hurts. It's a pity. I must find a way to get this debt back in the future. I thought the teacher would come quietly to teach me. Yes, in many Jianghu legends, a young man living alone in a small garden encounters a strange person and learns an amazing skill, but the people around him know nothing about it. This kind of thing happens quite often. Fan Xian looked at teacher Fei Jie bitterly and listened to his words. But not everyone in this world is a fool, and you are not my daughter-in-law, and I don't like climbing on the wall every day. Fei Jie looked at the little boy in front of him with a bad expression. So since you can have an identity, it's better to teach you with this identity. Fan Xian chuckled, climbed on his lap and sat down. Teacher, do you know my father? What kind of person is he? Fei Jie's face turned green and red. He knew that the little guy in front of him was full of cruelty, but he still pretended to be innocent in front of him. A feeling of complete powerlessness arose in his body. When he heard the other party's question, he thought for a while before answering. The Earl is a friend of my boss, so he asked me to teach you. You should call me teacher from now on. Teacher? What are you going to teach me? Fei Jie chuckled, and a strange light flashed in his brown eyes. I can only use poison, so I'm here to teach you how to kill people with poison and how not to be poisoned by others. He originally thought that this sentence could scare the child into crying, but Fei Jie immediately thought that the child in front of him was not an ordinary person, so his trick was probably useless. As expected, Fan Xian's big eyes were full of excitement, and his long eyelashes blinked in particular interest. Then what are you waiting for? Do you want me to catch a few rabbits to use as test subjects? Rabbits are not good, then just use toad? Fei Jie turned around stupidly, thinking, is this little guy really only 4 years old? A few months later, in the mass graves about 10 miles away from Danzhou port, in the pale eastern sky, the faint morning light shines on the dark graveyard, making this land look even more ghostly. Fei Jie stood outside the cemetery with his hands folded, looking at the young master squatting in the grave, his brows trembling slightly. This time, it was an excuse to go on a trip. I asked the old lady of the Earl's mansion for a few days' leave, and took Fan Xian to the cemetery to dig up corpses to learn about the structure of the human body. Although he knew that young Master Fan Xian was different from ordinary boys, Fei Jie saw that it only took a while for Fan Xian to get used to the gloomy atmosphere in the cemetery and to stabilize his mind so quickly. Fei Jie began to dissect the corpses in the cemetery according to the relevant content he had learned this month. Fei Jie himself was very frightened. He had always been a professional in dealing with these dead bodies, but he had never seen a 4-year-old boy who could face a corpse so calmly. There was a filthy stench in the grave pit, and a beautiful and clean little boy was wearing a big mask. This scene was terrifying and terrible. Fan Xian felt that his second life was still miserable.